Okay, cat and cow positions are a pretty classic yoga position that most people are pretty familiar with. But we're gonna go over it anyways, just for fun. So we're gonna come into a tabletop position or a quadruped position. So hips are stacked over knees, shoulders are stacked over elbows, over wrists, full palm of the hand and finger pad contact with the floor, not hyperextending the elbows, okay? They're straight, but it's a gentle, gentle bend where you're using your muscles to keep your elbows where they are, not just locking out the joints. Pushing away from the ground ever so slightly without going into a full-on rounded back just yet. Just to save us from collapsing our shoulders around the ears. And from here we can inhale as we dip the belly down, pelvis rises. So this gets us doing some pelvic tilts a little again. Bit of spinal extension. And exhaling as we come into cat. Inhaling through cow. And exhaling through cat. And just for the sake of practicing awareness and observation, notice as you shift between cat and cow, do you lose that integrity in your elbows or do you lose that integrity in your shoulders? Okay, so we want to kind of keep those upper arm, shoulder girdle situation strong, well supported with spacious, but able to adapt to the shape your spine is taking. Now we're going to take tabletop position a little further. We're going to start incorporating one of the back legs at a time. This is to start preparing for the one leg needing to go out behind you in a pigeon pose. So we're going to start off in a table pose. We're going to curl one of the feet's toes under. You're going to need to shift your weight ever so slightly, but hopefully not lose too much integrity through your spine and elbows and shoulders. And we're just going to slide that foot straight out behind us till we have a straight knee. Okay? We're not lifting the foot just yet. We're just going to slide it in and out. And what we're doing is we're moving the hip from being in a flexed position like this to being in more of an extended position like this. What also makes this relevant to pigeon is the one leg's extended while the other is still flexed, which is exactly what's going to happen in pigeon pose. So we're going to try this on the other side. Okay, so you're going to curl the other toes under. You're going to have to shift your weight to the other side just a little bit, and we're going to slide that foot out. Straight knee, and bring it back in. Now, if you are struggling with this and you're getting wobbly, or in order to go all the way to a straight knee, you really have to shift your weight or something, don't go all the way to a straight knee. Only send the leg back a little bit within a range where you can maintain that integrity of the original position and you can keep your balance. As you get better at that, and that starts to feel easy, then you can start straightening your leg just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Rather than trying to force your body to do the biggest version of something, we take it in baby steps and we build up that ability as we go, which is kind of what we're doing with this whole series. Rather than just trying to dig into pigeon pose over and over and over again, banging our heads against a wall, we're doing things in baby steps and we're building up our capacity so that then in the end we can do pigeon pose. All right, so something that is relevant to pigeon pose is the ability to extend through your spine, okay? Now, something that I see fairly often in any kind of back extension exercise is people will really jackknife at their low back. We kind of want to try and get as much of the extension happening through the full spine, from down at the pelvis where it tilts all the way up through to the upper shoulders and back. So we're going to work on that by introducing Sphinx pose today. But first, I just want to get you familiar with pelvic tilting. So you can do this sitting on the floor like me, or you can do it sitting on a cushion, cross-legged. You can also do this sitting on a chair. If you want to add some sensory input so that you can really feel your pelvis turning, you can straddle something. This might be a bit big, but you can straddle something so that as you tilt your pelvis, you're going to feel the pressure of that material shifting where it's pressing on your pelvic floor, okay? But that's essentially what we're going to do. We're going to start off sitting tall. Spine is stacked over the pelvis. And then we're going to start to let the pelvis rotate backwards. So tailbone is tucking under, pubic bone is coming up in the front, low back is rounding. And then we're going to untuck. Tailbone comes up, pubic bone dives down, back gets a little bit of a dip. Okay? So we're just going to get familiar with this feeling of the pelvic tilt, because this is going to be important in Sphinx. But in Sphinx, because you're laying on your front on the floor, there's not as much movement available. So it's a little harder to feel at first until you really know what you're feeling for. Okay? So we're going to get rid of this that's between our legs here, and we're going to come to the floor. So we're going to be laying on our stomachs. And before we really lift up into a Sphinx pose, first, I want you to find that pelvic tilt. So the one where we're tucking the tailbone and the pubic bone comes up in the front towards the belly button. I want you to just play with finding that and then just letting it go. Tilting and then letting it go. Now, the reason that this is kind of important is when we're coming into postures like Sphinx pose, the pelvis is grounded on the floor. It is very easy for the lower body and pelvis to stay where it is and to, you guessed it, jackknife at the low back to come up into extension. By tilting your pelvis down a little bit, we're introducing some of that flatness through the low back. This may seem a little counterintuitive, but if you bring your forearms under your shoulders, ground that pubic bone by tilting that pelvis forward and lift, pushing away from the ground with your forearms, creating that extension through as much of your spine as possible, you might notice that it feels different in your low back than if you were just to come down to the ground for a second, let that pelvis tilt go, don't make it do anything in particular, come up into Sphinx, and notice where you feel the most extension happening. If you are a person where you feel a lot of pressure or pinching in your low back, that is what the pelvic tilt is going to help protect against. Now, when I say protect, I don't necessarily mean that you are going to damage anything. I'm just saying we're trying to make this as comfortable as possible, and we're trying to have the extension to come from more of the spine than just the low back. But that's essentially Sphinx pose. We're going to tuck the pelvis. Glutes are not intentionally clenching. Elbows are stacked under shoulders. Push away from the floor, creating space between your shoulders and your ears, keeping that pelvis tucked, and just opening your chest towards the front of the room and just gently looking ahead of you on the floor. All right, this next one is kind of fun. It's a little bit pigeon pose-esque in a way. It's a one-legged frog, and it starts to warm you up for the general shape your body is going to need to take in pigeon. So we're going to be coming back to our roots, back to our belly on the floor. We're going to just support our head. I need to keep my head and chest a little higher because of my mic. You can have your forehead down on the floor if you want to. What we're going to do is one leg is going to stay exactly where it is. The other is going to start to come up alongside you here. So I'm just going to move a little more centered in the camera. So we're coming into this kind of half frog position. Some people even kind of sleep a little bit in a similar position to this. The pelvis is going to be hitched a little bit off the floor on the side with the raised leg, but we're encouraging a lot of rotation in this hip that's up, while the other stays just neutral behind us, which is exactly what it's going to need to do in Pigeon. Now, this is a lot of rotation. So if this is too much, there is something that you can do. Now, I of course have an actual yoga bolster. If you have one as well, you can use that. If you do not need to go spend a bunch of money on a yoga bolster. These are not cheap necessarily. You could just grab some bulky blankets and fold them up. You could grab some cushions off of your couch, a bunch of pillows, whatever you need to do, okay? But what we're going to do is we're going to put it on the floor, and you can build this up as however tall you need to. We're going to lay down and we're going to pretend that this bolster is the floor for our torso, okay? What this means is that when you bring this leg up, it doesn't have to be as rotated. So depending on how high you are, I'm gonna hodgepodge some things together here. Depending on how high you are, the hip needs to be less and less rotated in order to be in this position, okay? So that is a modification that you can use to make that more accessible if for now, your hip rotation is not very available. Let's go ahead and try this on the other side. So coming back to bellies, legs straight out back. Now the opposite side is gonna come up and we're gonna just hang out here. You can't really see it from the camera on this side, but I've got my one side up. You can have your head resting on the floor so that you could just hang out here and breathe. But again, this sort of correlates to Pigeon in that one leg's doing one thing, the other's doing another thing. Torso is kind of just facing forward neutral with the mat.